The battlefield was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of alien machinery and the acrid smell of scorched earth. The invaders had thought it was over, the final strike, the human resistance crushed. Their weapons had torn through the air like thunder, striking their target without mercy. Yet, as the smoke settled, one thing remained undeniable: the human was still alive. Captain V's, leader of the Kara alien forces, stared at the human lying motionless on the ground, his body riddled with holes. The resistance had been relentless, but no matter how many times they shot, no matter how many times they thought they had broken him, the human had never given in. Today, however, they were certain. It was over. Then the laughter began. It was a strange sound, unsettling, echoing through the empty spaces of the battlefield, a hollow chuckle from the broken man. V's eyes narrowed as the human's chest rose and fell with deep, shaking breaths. The laughter had begun as a soft chuckle, but now it grew louder, manic, almost defiant. You're laughing?" V's asked, his voice laced with disbelief. His claws flexed in confusion. This was not supposed to happen. The humans should fear, should scream. That was how it always worked. The technology of the carrot was overwhelming, it had never failed them before. The human, his face pale, dirted, and bloodied, slowly lifted his head. His eyes, locked onto V's, burned with an intensity that sent a shiver down the captain's spine. He wasn't angry. He wasn't broken. He was amused. "What's so funny?" V's growled, stepping closer, his confusion turning to suspicion. His soldiers behind him tensed, the sound of their alien language filling the air in uneasy murmurs. The human, in response, let out another laugh, a deep, unsettling thing that seemed to ripple through the air. "You really think you've won?" he said, his voice hoarse but carrying a weight far beyond the physical. V's claws twitched involuntarily. There was something off about this human, something that didn't fit the image of a broken, defeated creature. He should have been begging for mercy, not speaking with such defiance. "Enough games," V snapped, pulling a device from his belt. The machine hummed with power, capable of draining the human's energy, rendering him useless. He aimed it at the human's chest, but before he could fire, the human's laughter stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was suffocating. The soldiers surrounding V shuffled nervously, their gaze flicking between their leader and the strange human who had refused to fall. "You've been deceived," the human said suddenly, his voice now calm, almost serene. "I'm not the one who's been beaten. You are." Before V's could react, the human, his body barely intact, his strength all but spent, lifted his hand with a strange, almost imperceptible gesture. The ground beneath the carrot's feet shook violently, as though the earth itself had been awakened from a deep slumber. "Stop him!" V shouted, stepping back, his eyes darting to his soldiers, but none of them moved. Something was happening, something far beyond their understanding. And then it came. The energy. The hum of something ancient, a force that vibrated through the air like 1,000 whispers of destruction. V stumbled, his eyes wide as a pulse of raw power shot from the human, the shockwave so intense it sent the carrot forces to their knees. The human's laughter returned, but now it was not madness, it was clarity, a sound of knowing. The carrot, powerful as they were, had not anticipated this. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated humans. V struggled to rise, his mind racing to understand what he was witnessing. The human had done it. He had tapped into something unimaginable. There were no words to describe what had just occurred. The laughter was the key, the sound of a being who had discovered a power beyond all comprehension. "You may have advanced technology, you may have armies at your command," the human's voice rang out, each word a challenge, "but you cannot break what you cannot understand." The carrot soldiers, dazed and confused, were now realizing what had just happened, what they had feared but never believed possible. The human, slowly standing, locked eyes with V's. A single, quiet laugh escaped his lips. V's stomach tightened, a sense of dread washing over him. They had never fought a battle like this. They had never faced an enemy who didn't break under the weight of defeat. The human's smile grew. And the battle was just beginning. The corridor was cold, sterile, lined with the faint hum of distant machinery. V's, now alone, stood at the edge of the observation room, staring at the human through the reinforced glass. The human was unconscious, his body healed miraculously after the devastating assault. No wounds, no blood, no sign of the damage that had once torn through him. It was as though the violence had never happened. V's mind churned, the frustration gnawing at him. What was this human? His laughter had unsettled not only him, but the entire fleet. He was something more, something beyond their comprehension. This couldn't be just a trick, a feigned act. The sheer resilience was unlike anything V's had ever witnessed. He was dealing with more than an enemy, he was facing an enigma. A soft chime interrupted V's thoughts, and the doors to the observation room slid open. A carrot scientist, Dr. Kesh, stepped inside, his face tight with concern. The doctor's glowing green eyes met V's, and he quickly spoke, his voice laced with a calm urgency. The human's physiology is unlike anything we've encountered. His recovery rate is impossible. Not just his wounds. It's his mind, his response to the damage. We've never seen anything like it. V's hand clenched into a fist, his claws digging into his palm. Tell me something useful. We need answers. Now. Kesh lowered his gaze, unsure. We've been analyzing his neural patterns, but, he hesitated. There's something else. His reactions, they don't fit the normal biological framework. He's not just surviving, he's thriving in a way that doesn't align with any known species. Every test we run, he counters it. He adjusts. Adjusts? V's echoed, the word bitter on his tongue. You mean to say, he's adapting to us? Kesh nodded. Exactly. We're not dealing with a soldier, Captain. We're dealing with a phenomenon. The word hung in the air, weighty and foreboding. V's turned back to the glass, his eyes locking on the human, still motionless on the medical table. His breathing was steady, as though he were in deep slumber. Yet, something about him felt alive. More than alive. There was an energy, a raw potential, radiating from the human that sent a chill down V's spine. This human, V's murmured, more to himself than to Kesh, he's not afraid, is he? No, Captain. He's not. And that's what makes him dangerous. V's looked at Kesh, his eyes narrowing. Dangerous? To us? Kesh hesitated. To everything. The door to the room slid open again, this time revealing Lieutenant Thar, a tall, imposing carrot soldier. He stepped in, his posture rigid, his voice sharp. Captain, there's something you need to see. The human, he's waking up. V's heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the bed where the human lay, still and silent moments ago. Now, his fingers twitched, his eyes fluttering open. The human's gaze was vacant for a moment before locking with V's through the glass. That same intensity, the calm, unyielding resolve, was present in his eyes. And then the smile. The same unsettling grin. Is he mocking us? Thar asked, disbelief in his voice. No, V's replied, his tone low. He's not mocking us. He's measuring us. A tense silence stretched across the room. The human had been shot point blank, tortured, subjected to everything the carrot forces could throw at him. Yet here he was, standing up as if nothing had happened, exuding an unnatural calm. It was as if his resilience wasn't just a physical trait, it was a force of its own. V's turned to Kesh, his voice laced with the sting of frustration. You said he's adapting, evolving. But why? Why does he keep surviving? Dr. Kesh rubbed his hands together nervously. We've been running tests, yes, but there's one thing we can't understand. He's reacting differently. It's almost as if. As if what? V's interrupted. Kesh took a deep breath. As if he's learning. But not in the way a normal being learns. His responses, calculated. His emotions, they're being used. As a weapon. V's felt the ground beneath him shift. Emotions. Used as weapons. The human wasn't just an anomaly, he was something far more dangerous. The human spoke now, his voice breaking the silence. "You're not the first to underestimate us," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "But you will be the last." V's chest tightened as the weight of the words settled in. His people had conquered hundreds of worlds, obliterated species far more powerful than humans. Yet here, before him, stood something more terrifying than anything he'd ever faced. The human was no longer a prisoner. He was a force. And that laughter, that damnable laugh, had been the first clue. V's knew then that his enemies had only just begun to fight. The human was no longer contained. V's stood at the edge of the observation deck, his claws digging into the metal railing, his gaze fixed on the figure standing in the center of the chamber. The human was no longer restrained, no longer silent. He was moving, slow, deliberate steps, his gaze flickering between the carat officers standing watch. Dr. Kesh had been right. The human had adapted. But this wasn't just survival. This was evolution. In real time. And it terrified V's. "We can't keep him here," Thar said, his voice low, almost trembling. The lieutenant's usual confidence had faltered, replaced by a palpable fear that crackled in the air between them. "Whatever he's doing, it's only a matter of time before he escapes." V's throat tightened. He had seen it, the way the human's eyes gleamed with an unnerving calm, as though he already knew what was coming. The strange laughter had stopped, but the menace that had replaced it was even more dangerous. The human was aware. And his awareness felt like an avalanche, gathering power, preparing to crush anything in its path. The door to the chamber opened with a hiss, and Kesh entered, holding a data pad. His expression was grim, his features taut with urgency. "Captain, the human's neural patterns, they're evolving at an unprecedented rate. His resistance to our tests is off the charts. We've tried everything, pain simulations, chemical inhibitors, even subduing agents, but nothing works." V's gritted his teeth. "What does that mean for us, Doctor?" Kesh hesitated. "It means we've only just begun to understand how far the human's capabilities go. If we continue to push him, there's no telling what he'll do next." V's patience was wearing thin, but the doctor's words hit a nerve. They were walking into the unknown. And that made V's furious, because the carrot never lost control. Yet here they were, trapped in a situation where they had no clear path forward. The human turned, his gaze locking with V's. The tension in the room was suffocating. The alien leader felt a chill run down his spine as the human spoke, his voice smooth, almost conversational, despite the situation. "You think you can control me?" the human asked, his tone low and chilling. "You're just like the others. You take. You conquer. But you never learn." He stepped forward, his movements almost casual, as if he were walking through an ordinary day, unfazed by the presence of the carrot. V's muscles tensed. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, his claws extending, his voice low and menacing. "You'll never see the outside of this ship again." The human paused, and for a moment, V saw something flicker in his eyes, something human, something that made the captain pause for the briefest of moments. It was a flash of vulnerability. But then, just as quickly, the emotion was gone, replaced by the cold certainty of a predator. "You underestimate us," the human said. "That's your mistake." Before V's could respond, the air in the room thickened, vibrating with an unseen energy. A deep hum started in the walls, the metal groaning under an invisible pressure. V's ears popped as the atmosphere shifted, as if something in the very air was being manipulated. The human raised his hand. "Stay back." Thar shouted, but it was too late. A shockwave of force surged through the room, knocking V's and his officers to the ground. The walls shook, the lights flickering violently. The hum escalated into a high-pitched shriek, a sound like the tearing of the fabric of reality itself. For a moment, it felt as though the ship was alive, as though the human had somehow taken control of its very structure. How is he doing this? Thar gasped, scrambling to his feet. The human's eyes were glowing now, brighter than before. His smile had returned, but there was no amusement in it, only pure, unrelenting certainty. You think you can control the universe with your weapons, your technology. But what you fail to realize is that we are the ones who control it. We always have. With a simple flick of his wrist, the hum died. The room fell silent, the air suddenly still, like the calm before a storm. V's mind raced. The human had just done something impossible, something that should have been beyond the reach of anyone. He had bent the environment itself to his will, wielding it like a weapon. We need to stop him, Kesh muttered, his voice barely audible over the ringing in his ears. But even he knew that stopping the human was no longer a matter of brute force. There was something else at play here. Something that no one, not even the carrot, had ever encountered before. V stood slowly, his eyes still locked on the human. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a simple prisoner anymore. This human was a threat on a scale the carrot had never prepared for. The power had shifted. And the carrot empire was beginning to feel its weight. V stood at the center of the control room, his eyes fixed on the human through the large observation window. The once prisoner was now free, standing defiantly at the heart of the ship's command center, his eyes burning with an unrelenting fury. The carrot had underestimated him. No, that was an understatement. They had ignored him, believing their advanced technology and superior numbers would be enough to crush a species so young, so weak. Now, humanity was proving that it was something else entirely. The hum of the ship's engines filled the room, an eerie undertone to the tension building between the two forces. Outside, the void of space stretched endlessly. V's had always prided himself on the carrot's superiority, on their unshakable control of the universe. Yet, as he watched the human, he realized that control was slipping through his claws. "Are you prepared, Captain?" Thar asked, his voice tense, barely above a whisper. The lieutenant stood beside V's, his posture rigid, every muscle in his body coiled in anticipation. V's didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the controls, his sharp eyes flicking across the array of screens. Data was flashing on each of them, running simulations, analysis of the human's power. It was futile. There was no real strategy that could counter the force the human was wielding. The human's laughter had not returned. Instead, there was a quiet stillness to his presence now, one that weighed heavier than anything else. It was as though he had reached a place beyond defiance, he had reached transcendence. "You think you've won," V's muttered, his voice like gravel. He was speaking to the human now, even though he was not in direct communication. He knew the human could hear him. "You think you've broken us, but you've only ignited a fire. And fire can be controlled." The human's eyes flickered, the faintest smile playing at the edges of his lips. "You're wrong," he replied, his voice carrying across the vast distance. "You've already lost." V's heart skipped a beat. The words pierced through him like a blade. Lost. That was the one thing he couldn't accept. To lose was to admit weakness. And weakness was something the Carrot Empire had never known. Without a word, V's turned to the battle monitor, his claws tapping against the screen. The final offensive was about to begin. But even as he ordered his forces into position, a knot of doubt twisted in his stomach. Could they really stop this human? Could they stop humanity? The answer nodded him, but there was no turning back now. The Carrot were not a species known for retreat. They were conquerors, and they would either crush this human or burn the galaxy in the attempt. "Fire," V's commanded. The Carrot fleet's weapons powered up in unison, their devastating power ready to rain down on the human. The first wave of lasers shot out, cutting through the vacuum of space toward the human's position. The human's response was swift. He raised his hand, the air around him vibrating with an energy unlike anything the Carrot had ever felt. The lasers struck, but they bounced off him. Not a shield, not a defensive mechanism, but something else. The energy of the blast seemed to dissolve, as if the human had turned the very force of the weapon back onto itself. V's eyes widened. "What is this?" he gasped, his voice barely audible. The human wasn't just resilient, he was rewriting the rules of physics itself. The room fell into a stunned silence as the second wave of fire approached. Again, the human raised his hand, but this time, the ship itself seemed to tremble. The walls groaned under the pressure of the energy he was unleashing. The lasers froze mid-air, suspended in time, before being crushed into nothingness by the sheer force of the human's will. "Impossible," Thar whispered. "He's rewriting everything." The human's voice broke through the chaos, his words carrying across the chamber. "You never understood. You thought you could break us with your weapons. You thought you could make us bend. But we are not like you. We are something more." The temperature in the room dropped, a cold shiver creeping up V's spine. He felt it, too, the shift. It was no longer about defeating the human. It was about surviving his wrath. The Carrot had been the supreme force in the galaxy for millennia. They had taken worlds, enslaved civilizations, and crushed anyone who dared to oppose them. But in front of this human, V's realized the truth: they were the invaders now. They were the ones who didn't belong. And in that moment, V's understood something terrifying. The human's power didn't just lie in his ability to survive, it was his ability to transform. The Carrot Empire was now facing a force that could not be measured by weapons or technology. It was a force that could only be felt. The human's power surged one last time, a wave of pure energy that cascaded through the ship, threatening to tear it apart. The room shook violently. V's mind raced for a plan, for a way out, but in the silence that followed, he knew there was no escape. The last thing he heard before the universe went black was the human's final words. "It's over."